Take the horses and ride south. Don't look back, no matter what you hear.
What about you?
The wagon wheel cracked against stone, and Clara Finch tumbled forward into the dirt. She didn't cry out, couldn't afford to, not with the sound of hoofbeats still echoing somewhere behind her, maybe a mile back, maybe less. Her hands were scraped raw from gripping the reins too tight for too long, and her dress, once cream-colored, now streaked with road dust and sweat, clung to her like a second skin she wanted to shed. The mule brayed once, then twice, before collapsing onto its side. Dead or dying, Clara couldn't tell. She didn't have time to check. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Nothing but open grassland and the low, rolling hills of eastern Montana Territory. No cover, no town, no help. Just her and the busted wagon, and the men who'd been tracking her since she ran. Clara pressed her palm against her ribs, where the bruise still throbbed from 3 nights ago. The night she'd made the mistake of saying no. The night Marcus Tully decided that a woman alone on a failing homestead didn't get to refuse anything. Not his offer to buy her land, not his hands on her wrists, not the implication that she could either sign the deed over or be dragged to the nearest county seat and charged with something he'd make up on the spot. She'd run instead, took the mule, the wagon, and nothing else. Now the mule was dead, and the wagon was kindling. Clara stood on shaking legs and turned in a slow circle. The sun hung low and mean in the western sky, casting long shadows across the valley. And then she saw it, a thin ribbon of smoke rising from beyond a stand of cottonwood trees, maybe half a mile north. A homestead. Her chest tightened. Homesteads meant people. People meant questions. Questions meant explanations she didn't have the breath or the trust to give. But the hoofbeats were getting closer. She ran. The cabin sat low against the hillside, half hidden by the cottonwoods and a makeshift fence that looked like it had been mended a dozen times over. Smoke curled from the chimney. A single horse stood tied near the porch, its ears flicking toward her as she stumbled into the clearing. Clara's lungs burned, her vision blurred at the edges. She didn't know if it was exhaustion or fear or both, but her legs kept moving until she reached the porch steps. The door was closed. She raised her fist to knock, then froze. What if they were friends of Tully's? What if they turned her away? What if they handed her over for a reward she didn't even know existed yet? Behind her, the sound of riders grew louder, distinct now, deliberate. 3 horses, maybe 4. Clara's hand trembled as she finally knocked. Once, twice. The door swung open. A man stood in the threshold, tall and lean, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen more than its share of hard years. His eyes were dark, unreadable. He held a rifle loosely in one hand, barrel pointed at the floor. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Clara opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to say help me or please or they're coming, but all that came out was a choked whisper. Get inside. His voice was low, firm, not a question. Clara blinked. What? Get inside, he repeated, stepping aside. His gaze flicked past her toward the trees. Before they see you. She didn't move, couldn't. Every instinct screamed that trusting a stranger was how women like her ended up worse than dead. But the hoofbeats were close now, close enough that she could hear the jangle of tack and the low murmur of male voices. The man's jaw tightened. He reached out, not roughly, but with the kind of certainty that didn't leave room for argument, and pulled her inside. The door shut behind her. The cabin was small, a single room with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs near the hearth, and shelves lined with tin cups, a coffee pot, and a Bible that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The air smelled like wood smoke and old leather. Clara pressed her back against the wall, heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The man moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtain. His expression didn't change, but his grip on the rifle tightened. They looking for you? He asked quietly. Clara nodded, even though he wasn't looking at her. They have cause. No. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. That mean they think they do, or they just mean? She swallowed hard, both. The sound of hooves stopped just outside. Voices drifted through the walls, rough, impatient. Ryder went this way, I'm sure of it. Check the cabin. Nah, Gideon Cole, don't take kindly to strangers poking around. Man's got a temper. A pause, then a different voice, older, slower. Gideon Cole's got no reason to harbor a runaway woman. If she's here, he'll hand her over, and if he don't, we'll burn him out. Clara's breath hitched. The man, Gideon, apparently, didn't flinch. He turned from the window and looked at her fully for the first time. You got a name. Clara. Clara what? Fenji. He nodded once, as if filing it away. Then he set the rifle down against the wall and crossed the room to the hearth. He picked up the poker, stirred the fire, and added another log like nothing in the world was wrong. Stay quiet, he said. Don't move unless I tell you to. Before Clara could respond, a fist pounded on the door. Gideon Cole, open up. Gideon didn't hurry. He wiped his hands on his trousers, crossed to the door, and opened it just wide enough to lean against the frame. Virgil, he said evenly, didn't expect company. Clara couldn't see the man on the other side, but she could hear him, a gravelly voice edged with authority that didn't quite hide the meanness underneath. We are tracking a woman, ran off from Marcus Tully's property 3 days back, stole a mule and a wagon. You seen her? No. You sure about that? I'm sure I haven't seen anyone. A pause, then, mind if we take a look inside? Gideon's tone didn't shift. I do mind, actually. Cole, don't make this difficult. Tully's got legal claim to that woman's land. She owes him debt. Running makes her a thief. Sounds like a problem between her and Tully. It's a problem for anyone hiding her. Gideon straightened slightly. Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested just a little too casually near the doorframe, near where, she realized, a revolver hung on a peg. Virgil, Gideon said quietly, you've known me long enough to know I don't lie and I don't hide thieves. If I'd seen her, I'd tell you. I haven't. So unless you've got a warrant signed by a real judge, you're done here. Silence. Then the sound of boots shifting in the dirt. We'll be back, Virgil said, and if we find out you lied, Gideon, there won't be enough of this cabin left to piss on. Looking forward to it. The door closed. Gideon stood there for a long moment, listening. The hoofbeats started again, moving away slowly at first, then faster. When the sound finally faded, he turned to look at Clara. She was still pressed against the wall, shaking. They're gone, he said. Clara exhaled, but it came out jagged, half a sob. Why did you do that? Gideon picked up his rifle and returned it to its place above the mantel. Because Virgil Shaw's a bastard who works for bastards, and I don't much care for either. You don't even know me. He looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or regret. No, he said quietly, but I know what it looks like when someone's running from something they didn't deserve. Clara wanted to believe him. She wanted to collapse into the chair by the fire and let herself cry for the first time in 3 days. But trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Gideon poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one on the table in front of Clara. She stared at it like it might bite her. It's just coffee, he said. I know. Then drink it. She didn't move. Gideon sat down across from her, wrapping both hands around his own cup. The firelight flickered between them, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. You said Tully's claiming you owe him, Gideon said. That true? Clara finally lifted the cup, but didn't drink. My husband died 2 years ago. We had a homestead, 40 acres near the Tongue River. We were making it work, barely, but we were managing. She paused, staring into the dark liquid. Then the drought came, lost most of the crop, couldn't pay what we owed to the bank. Tully bought the note. And he came to collect. He came to collect more than money. Gideon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He said I could sign the land over and walk away, or I could stay and work it off. Her voice cracked on the last two words. He didn't say it like that, but we both knew what he meant. So you ran. So I ran. She finally took a sip, grimacing at the bitterness. I didn't steal anything. That mule was mine. The wagon was mine, but Tully's got friends, lawmen, clerks, judges. He'll make it look however he wants. Gideon leaned back in his chair, studying her. Why'd you come this direction? There's nothing out here but empty land and people who don't want to be found. That's exactly why. He almost smiled, almost. Then Clara set the cup down and looked at him directly for the first time. Why did you really help me? Gideon's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a door opening just a crack. Like I said. No, Clara's voice was steady now, stronger. You said you know what it looks like when someone's running. That's not the same as helping. Men see women running all the time and they don't do a damn thing. So why did you? For a long moment, Gideon didn't answer. He turned his cup slowly between his palms, the firelight catching on the scar that ran from his knuckle to his wrist. What was your husband's name? He asked quietly. Clara blinked, thrown by the question. Thomas Finch. Why? Gideon's hands stilled. Did he ever talk about the war? Some, not much. Did he ever mention the Shenandoah Valley, 1864? Clara's breath caught. He was there, he said. He said it was the worst winter of his life, said he watched good men die for nothing. Gideon nodded slowly, his gaze distant. I was there too. The air between them grew heavier. We were part of the same regiment, Gideon continued. Different companies, but we crossed paths a few times. Your husband was a good man, quiet, kept to himself mostly, but when things got bad, he was the one who'd share his rations or help dig grave when the ground was frozen solid. He paused. I didn't know him well, but I knew him enough. Clara's heart thudded in her chest. If you knew Thomas, then why? I didn't recognize you, Gideon said. Not at first, but when you said your name, Finch, it clicked. And then I saw this. He reached across the table and gently turned her wrist, revealing a thin scar that ran along the edge of her palm. Thomas told me once about how his wife cut her hand open on a plow blade the day they broke ground on their land, said she stitched it herself because the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride and she didn't want to wait. His voice softened. He was proud of that, said you were tougher than half the men he'd served with. Clara pulled her hand back, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes. You remember that? I remember a lot of things I wish I didn't. She looked at him, really looked, and saw the weight of it in the lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders hunched slightly even when he sat still. This wasn't a man who'd walked away from the war unscathed. None of them had. I also remember, Gideon said quietly, the day Thomas got a letter saying his father had died. He asked for leave to go home and help settle the estate. His captain denied it, said the regiment needed every man. He swallowed. Thomas went anyway, deserted for 3 weeks, came back and took the punishment, 30 lashes and docked pay for 6 months. Clara's chest tightened. He never told me that. He wouldn't have, but the reason he went, Gideon's voice grew rougher, the reason he risked everything was because his father left debts, and if someone didn't settle them, the bank was going to take the land, your land. The silence stretched thin and fragile between them. I didn't know your husband well, Gideon said again, but I knew he'd do anything to protect what mattered to him. And when you showed up here running from a man trying to take the same land Thomas nearly died to keep, he trailed off, shaking his head. I couldn't turn you away, not when I know what he sacrificed for it. Clara's hands trembled around the cup. That doesn't make this your responsibility. No, it doesn't. Then why are you still helping me? Gideon met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath the surface. Guilt, maybe, or regret, or both. Because I wasn't there when it mattered, he said quietly. I survived the war, came home, built this place, and I told myself I'd done enough. But men like Tully, they're still out there, taking what doesn't belong to them, hurting people who can't fight back. And I've spent the last 10 years pretending that's not my problem. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm a fool for getting involved. But if I can help Thomas Finch's widow keep the land he bled for, then maybe I'm not as useless as I thought. Clara stared at him, and for the first time since she'd run, something in her chest loosened. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest possibility of it. I don't need a savior, she said. Good, because I'm not one. But I could use an ally. Gideon nodded once, then that's what you've got. Outside, the wind howled through the cottonwoods, the fire crackled and popped, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out into the night. Clara took another sip of coffee. It was still bitter, but this time it didn't taste quite so bad. Tully won't stop, she said. He'll come back, and when he does, he'll bring more men. I know. You're not afraid. Gideon's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I didn't say that. Clara almost laughed, almost. Get some rest, Gideon said, standing. You can take the bed, I'll keep watch. I can't. You can and you will. His tone left no room for argument. We'll figure out the rest in the morning. Clara wanted to protest, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She nodded and moved toward the bed, her legs barely holding her up. As she lay down, still fully dressed, she glanced back at Gideon. He'd taken up position by the window, rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. Thank you, she whispered. He didn't turn. Don't thank me yet. Clara woke to the sound of voices. Not close, maybe 100 yards out, but close. Enough that her eyes snapped open and her heart slammed into her ribs. The cabin was still dark. The fire had burned down to embers. Gideon stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the pre-dawn gray seeping through the cracks in the shutters. They're back, he said quietly, without turning. Clara sat up, every muscle in her body coiled tight. How many? 6, maybe 7. He shifted slightly, rifle in hand. Tully's with them this time. Her stomach dropped. Marcus Tully didn't ride out for small things. If he was here, it meant he wasn't leaving without her, or without burning Gideon's cabin to the ground. I can run, Clara said quickly. I can slip out the back, head for the trees. You won't make it 50 feet. You don't know that. Gideon finally looked at her. His face was hard, set like stone. They've got men circling the property. I saw them move into position 10 minutes ago. This isn't a search party anymore, Clara. It's a siege. She stood, legs shaking. Then what do we do? We wait. For what? For them to make the first move. Before Clara could respond, a voice cut through the morning stillness, loud, smooth, and laced with the kind of authority that came from money and meanness in equal measure. Gideon Cole. Marcus Tully. Clara would recognize that voice anywhere. I know she's in there. Clara Finch is a debtor and a thief, and you're harboring her. That makes you complicit. Now I'm a reasonable man. Send her out, and we'll leave you in peace. Keep her, and we'll drag you both to the nearest magistrate in chains. Gideon didn't move, didn't respond. Clara stepped up beside him, peering through the gap in the curtain. Tully sat astride a black gelding, flanked by 6 men, some she recognized as hired guns, others as locals who'd sold their spines for Tully's coin. One of them was Virgil Shaw, the man who'd come to the door yesterday. Tully himself looked every bit the part of a man who believed the world bent to his will. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver streaking his dark hair and a tailored coat that didn't belong anywhere near Montana territory. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'll give you 1 minute to think it over, Cole. After that, we're coming in. Clara's breath came shallow and fast. He'll kill you. Maybe. Gideon. He won't kill me in front of witnesses, Gideon said calmly. Not if he wants to keep pretending he's a legitimate businessman. Men like Tully care about reputation. He'll want this to look legal. And if it doesn't, Gideon's jaw tightened. Then we make it messy enough that he regrets it. He moved to the door, checked the revolver on his hip, and took a long breath. Then he opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Clara stayed inside, pressed against the wall, watching through the crack. Gideon stood at the top of the steps, rifle resting loosely in the crook of his arm. He looked smaller out there, surrounded by 7 men on horseback, but he didn't flinch. "Tully," he said evenly. "Cole," Tully's smile widened. "I'd say it's good to see you, but we both know that'd be a lie." "What do you want?" "You know what I want. The woman, she's mine." "She's not property." "She's a debtor, and in this territory, that's close enough." Tully leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to something almost conversational. "Now, I don't know what she told you, probably spun some sad story about being victimized, but the truth is simple. Her husband borrowed money he couldn't pay back. I bought the debt. She refused to honor it. That makes her a thief under territorial law." Gideon's expression didn't change. "You're full of shit." Tully's smile faltered. "Careful, Cole. She doesn't owe you anything. You bought a piece of paper and called it a debt, but what you really wanted was her land. And when she wouldn't hand it over, you decided to take her instead." One of the men behind Tully shifted uncomfortably. Another, Virgil, spat into the dirt. Tully's eyes narrowed. "You're making accusations you can't prove." "I don't need to prove anything. I just need to not hand her over." "That's obstruction. Call it whatever you want." For a moment, no one moved. The wind rustled through the cottonwoods. A horse stamped its hoof. Then Tully straightened in his saddle, his voice hardening. "You're a fool, Cole. You think you're protecting her, but all you're doing is making it worse. For both of you." "Then I guess I'm a fool." Tully's hand drifted toward his coat, not for a gun, but for something else. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it up. "This," he said, "is a writ signed by Judge Carver in Miles City. It gives me legal authority to retrieve Clara Finch and return her to custody for failure to honor her debts. If you interfere, I'm authorized to use whatever force necessary." Gideon's knuckles whitened on the rifle. "Judge Carver's been in Tully's pocket for years. That paper's worth less than the ink it's printed with." "May be, but it's still legal." Tully folded the paper and tucked it back into his coat. "So here's how this works. You step aside, I take the woman, and we all go home. Or you stand there playing hero, and I burn this cabin down with both of you inside. Either way, I'm leaving here with her." Inside, Clara felt her chest cave in. This was it, the moment where everything collapsed. But Gideon didn't move. "You're not taking her," he said quietly. Tully's expression darkened. "You'd die for a woman you don't even know." "I knew her husband, that's enough." Something flickered across Tully's face, surprise, maybe, or confusion, but it was gone in an instant. He gestured to his men. "Virgil, take him." Virgil dismounted, hand resting on the revolver at his hip. 2 other men followed. Gideon raised the rifle just slightly, not aiming, not yet, but the message was clear. "I wouldn't," Gideon said. Virgil stopped. "You can't take all of us, Cole." "No, but I can take you." The silence stretched tight as a wire. And then, from somewhere beyond the trees, a horse screamed. Everyone froze. Another voice, rough, familiar, cut through the stillness. "Virgil Shaw, you son of a bitch, what the hell do you think you're doing on Cole's land?" From the tree line, 3 riders emerged, older men, weathered and lean, with rifles slung across their saddles. Clara didn't recognize them, but Gideon clearly did. One of them, a grizzled man with a gray beard and a scar running down his cheek, rode forward and stopped between Tully's men and the cabin. "Name's Caleb Rourke," he said, addressing Tully. "I've ranched this valley for 30 years. Gideon Cole's a friend of mine, and I don't take kindly to men threatening friends." Another rider, younger but just as hard-eyed, spoke up. "We heard Tully was riding out this way. Figured we'd come see what all the fuss was about. Tully's jaw clenched. This doesn't concern you. Maybe not, Caleb said, but I'm making it my concern. Virgil looked between Caleb and Tully, uncertainty flickering across his face. Tully's hand tightened on the reins. You're making a mistake, Rourke. Wouldn't be the first time. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Tully exhaled slowly, his smile returning cold and sharp. Fine, we'll go for now. He looked at Gideon. But this isn't over, Cole, not by a long shot. He turned his horse and rode off, his men following reluctantly behind. Clara watched them disappear into the trees, her heart still pounding. When they were gone, Caleb dismounted and walked up to the porch. He looked at Gideon, then at the cabin, then back at Gideon. You're an idiot, he said. Gideon lowered the rifle. I know. You're also lucky I don't sleep much anymore. I know that too. Caleb glanced at the cabin door. She inside. Yeah. She worth all this. Gideon's expression softened just barely. Her husband was. Caleb nodded slowly, then he clapped Gideon on the shoulder. We'll stay close, just in case. Thanks, Caleb. Don't thank me yet, Tully's not done. He climbed back onto his horse, and the three riders melted back into the trees. Gideon stood there for a long moment, staring at the horizon. Then he turned and walked back inside. Clara was sitting at the table, shaking. Gideon set the rifle down. You all right? She nodded, even though she wasn't. They'll be back, she whispered. I know. Then what do we do? Gideon looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something like hope in his eyes. We get you your land back. Tully came back 3 days later. But this time, he didn't come with hired guns. He came with the sheriff. Gideon saw them from the window, 2 riders, moving slow and deliberate through the morning mist, Tully on his black gelding, and beside him, Sheriff Denton Marsh, a man Gideon had known since before the war. Marsh wasn't corrupt, but he was weak, the kind of man who'd enforce the law as long as it didn't cost him anything. They're here, Gideon said. Clara stood by the hearth, hands clenched at her sides. What do we do? We talk. And if talking doesn't work? Gideon checked the revolver on his hip. Then we make sure we're not the ones who lose. He stepped outside, Clara close behind him. Tully and Marsh reined in their horses 20 feet from the cabin. Marsh looked uncomfortable. Tully looked smug. Morning, Cole, Marsh said, tipping his hat. Wish I was here on better terms. Then don't be here at all. Marsh sighed. You know I can't do that. Tully's got a writ, signed and legal. Says Clara Finch is a debtor and he's got the right to collect. That writ's a lie, Clara said, stepping forward. I don't owe him anything. Tully's smile widened. Your husband did, and since he's dead, the debt falls to you. That's not how it works. It is in Miles City. Judge Carver says so. Marsh shifted in his saddle. Look, Clara, I don't want trouble, but if the law says... The law says whatever Tully pays it to say, Gideon cut in. You. Know that, Denton. You've known it for years. Marsh's face flushed. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to protect people, not deliver them to men like him. Before Marsh could respond, the sound of hooves echoed through the valley. All 4 of them turned. From the north, a group of riders appeared, Caleb Rourke and his men, along with a dozen others. Ranchers, homesteaders, men who'd worked this land long enough to know when something was wrong. They rode into the clearing and formed a loose semicircle around Tully and Marsh. Caleb dismounted, his expression hard. Sheriff. Marsh's eyes widened. Caleb, what's this about? It's about stopping a damn injustice before it gets worse. Caleb gestured to the men behind him. We all know Tully, we all know what he does. Buys up debts, twists the law, and takes what doesn't belong to him, and we're done pretending it's legal. Tully's smile faltered. You're interfering with official business. Official business? Another rancher, a broad-shouldered man named Hayes spat into the dirt. You call stealing land official business, you call threatening a widow official business. Marsh looked between Caleb and Tully, clearly torn. I have a writ. Signed by a judge in Tully's pocket, Caleb said. We all know Carver. Hell, half of us have had to deal with his bullshit rulings. But this time, it's not just one person standing alone. It's all of us. Tully's jaw clenched. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but I'd rather make a mistake standing up for what's right than make a living looking the other way. One by one, the other men nodded. Marsh's shoulders sagged. He looked at Tully, then at Clara, then back at the crowd. Finally, he exhaled slowly and dismounted. I can't enforce that writ, he said quietly. Tully's face darkened. What? Not if the whole valley's against it. I'd need a militia, and I don't have one. Marsh looked at Clara. If you can prove the debt isn't valid, I'll back you, but if Tully's got legal standing. He doesn't, Gideon said. He disappeared into the cabin and returned a moment later with a small leather satchel. He handed it to Marsh. Inside were papers, deeds, receipts, letters. Thomas Finch paid off his loan 2 months before he died, Gideon said. He didn't tell Clara because he wanted to surprise her, but the bank recorded it. I tracked down the receipt 6 months ago when I heard Tully was moving in on her land. Marsh flipped through the papers, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. This says the debt was settled. That's because it was, Gideon said. Tully bought a fabricated loan. He knew it was fake, and he bet no one would check. Tully's horse shifted beneath him, his hands tightened on the reins. That's a forgery. It's not, Marsh said, his voice cold. I know the bank clerk's signature. This is real. Tully's mask finally cracked. You think this changes anything? You think a piece of paper is going to stop me? No, Caleb said, but we will. The men behind him didn't move, but the message was clear. Tully looked around, at the ranchers, at the sheriff, at Gideon and Clara, and for the first time, Clara saw fear in his eyes. This isn't over, Tully said, his voice low and venomous. Yeah, Caleb said, it is. Tully yanked his horse around and rode off, disappearing into the trees. Marsh handed the papers back to Gideon. You should take these to the county clerk, get the deed transferred back into Clara's name. I will. Marsh nodded, then climbed back onto his horse. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it took this long. Just do better next time, Gideon said. Marsh rode off, leaving Clara and Gideon standing in the clearing with the other men. Caleb clapped Gideon on the shoulder. You're still an idiot. I know, but you're our idiot. Gideon almost smiled. 3 weeks later, Clara stood on the front porch of her homestead, looking out over the land that was, finally, legally, hers again. The cabin was smaller than she remembered. The fields were overgrown. The barn needed a new roof. But it was hers. Gideon had ridden out with her, helped clear the worst of the debris, and stayed long enough to make sure the place was livable. Now he stood beside her, quiet as always. Thank you, Clara said, for everything. You already thanked me. I know, but it doesn't feel like enough. Gideon looked at her, something soft in his eyes. You don't owe me anything, Clara. I know, but I want you to have this. She held out the pocket watch, the one Thomas had carried through the war. Gideon shook his head. That's yours. It was his, and he'd want you to have it. She pressed it into his hand. He trusted you, so do I. Gideon stared at the watch, his throat working. Finally, he nodded and tucked it into his pocket. If you ever need anything, he said quietly, you know where to find me. I do. He tipped his hat, climbed onto his horse, and rode off into the fading light. Clara watched him go, the weight in her chest finally lifting. She turned back to the cabin, the fields, the sky stretching wide and open above her. And for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Years later, travelers passing through the valley would hear stories of the widow who'd fought a land baron and won, not with a gun, but with the help of men who decided that silence cost too much. They'd hear about Gideon Cole, the recluse who became a protector when it mattered. And they'd hear about the pocket watch he carried until the day he died, a reminder that some debts are paid not in gold, but in courage. The sun dipped lower over Montana territory. Dust rose from Clara's fields as she worked the land her husband had died to keep. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the ghosts of old wars, old wounds, and old promises finally kept.